Hi and welcome to On Two Wheels. Today I am going to go through some key modifications that every DRZ rider can enjoy. So in this video, I'm going to talk about some of the most popular and proven modifications on the DRZ400. So the DRZ400 has been in the market for 20 years, and throughout these 20 years, riders have come up with ways to make their DRZ a little bit better than it was before. After all, that's something we all want to do with our bikes. So the good thing about the DRZ400 is that there's a huge riding community and everyone is so nice and friendly. So that means we've got access to a large knowledge base at any given time. So every time we buy a motorcycle, we want to personalize it. We want to make it ours and make it unique because it has to be my DRZ. So I've gone through this process 3 times with DRZs. I've had 3 DRZs over the, but every time I start off with the bike, I have a different picture of how I want my bike to look like. But despite all that, there are some modifications that are standard and will benefit every single person. But before we go on further, let me explain what this list is based on. There are some modifications that I'm leaving out because they are very rider specific and may not necessarily be applicable to everyone. So I'm not going to include things like setting up suspension, lowering the suspension, changing the seat, or using things like bar risers. So I'm also not going to talk about some of the more common things that all bikes come with these days. Things like the hand guards, the bash plate, the radiator guards. That's because most new bikes actually come with these standard, and even the older bikes, the riders have been on the bike for long enough to know how important these parts are and they've added it anyway. So I'm going to start the list with the easiest and cheapest modifications and then move on to more complex and expensive ones. So this is a list you can look at when you buy your bike, and hopefully you will be able to work through the whole list during your years of ownership. So first let's talk about the 3x3 mod. So this was a modification done on earlier bikes, I think bikes before 2005 and especially the US models, because the airbox on these bikes came with a 2 small holes or a single small hole for the air to be sucked in. So this wasn't really big enough. So what most people did was cut out a square which was 3 inches by 3 inches to make the airflow less restrictive. Now on newer bikes, you don't necessarily need to worry about this because the airbox comes with a rubber boot. And when you take this rubber boot off, it ends up being a square which is almost 3x3. So pretty much all you need to do is take off the rubber boot. Now this does become a bit controversial. I've heard some people say that you need to do a rejetting of your carb to accommodate extra air, but personally I've not felt the need for it, and honestly it's not really necessary because you're not forcing any extra air in. All you're doing is essentially making it less restrictive. So technically the air that would have come in anyway is what's going to be used. But at the same time, there's a lot of riders who give very good explanations on this and why it should be rejetted. So if any of you have actually had to rejet your carb because of the 3x3 mod, or if you felt a difference with the 3x3 and the rejetting, do let me know. Leave a comment so that the knowledge can be shared with everyone. The second modification I'm going to talk about is rerouting the breather hoses for the carburetor. This is another free modification that doesn't cost you any money. Now if your DRZ has a FCR carb, it will have about 4 breather hoses which dangle from the bottom of the engine. So now this is all fine until you have to do a water crossing. So the moment these hoses get submerged, the engine is going to stall and it will not start up. So essentially you will need to push your bike out of the water. So it's a good thing to route these hoses under your seat. So what I've done here is taken 2 of these wire hoses and routed them under the seat here. And the other 2 hoses also come under the seat and they have plenty of air to breathe from. An ideal or perfect way to handle it is to actually put a T-joint on the hoses and have one end hang down and one end under the seat, so that if you do get water in it, the water will easily drain out, but it will also be breathing a lot of air from under the seat. So the next modification I'm going to talk about is the kickstand bypass. Now this is another hot topic that riders have very different opinions about. I would say it's a calculated risk that you take. The kickstand switch essentially makes sure that the bike won't move off with the kickstand down. But this also means that if you have a hard landing, the kickstand is going to bounce down and the engine could stall. I have done a video on this before on how to install the kickstand switch and how to bypass it. So I'll add the link to that below. So hopefully that will be more helpful if you want to explore this. So the next big thing that you could upgrade is the headlight. Now the DRZ stock headlight is a pretty decent headlight if you're going to be riding in the city. But if you're doing a lot of adventure riding or long highway rides in the dark, it just won't cut it. In fact, I was quite happy with my stock headlight until I did a desert trip with some 4-wheel drive friends and I was the only bike in the group. Now, during this trip, one of the 4-wheel drives actually broke down and we had to tow him out of the desert. So it was getting dark and we were kind of lost. So it made sense for me as a bike to go ahead, make sure that we were on the right track and then come back and get the 4-wheel drives to follow. Because we didn't want to go down the wrong track and have to reverse a 4-wheel drive that was being towed in the sand. So with the stock headlight, I could only see about 30 meters ahead and that wasn't enough. Because I need to see further into the dunes and I need a wide spread just so that I don't miss anything. And the thing was, as soon as I go over a dune, I completely lose my orientation and have no idea where I am. So I didn't want to get lost by myself, so I ended up going back and eventually made it out. So good bright light definitely helps. There's actually a lot of headlights that fit directly onto the original headlight mount, but at the same time you could get an LED bar. So these act as a supplementary light when you really need it. Or you could do what I've done and get yourself a rally kit with proper lighting. So if you have been following my channel, you know that's something that I have been exploring for the past couple of months. But if you haven't seen this before, I'm going to add a link to my rally project so that you can get an idea of exactly what I'm doing. Next, I'm going to talk about case savers. Now, case savers are actually pretty important. I don't need to tell you what they do. It's fairly obvious. It protects the case. But I'm going to explain how important it could be. It's almost a no-brainer that you need case savers because essentially it's a pretty vulnerable spot that you could damage very easily. Because this is something you don't realize that you need until it's too late. When I parted out my last bike, I sold both my case savers to riders who damaged theirs. And neither of these were damages caused by heavy enduro riding. Both of these were low speed crashes. In fact, one was literally falling over in the car park. So you might just drop your bike in the car park or in front of your favorite kebab shop and still damage your case saver without even realizing it. So spend that $20-30, be prepared and save yourself the hassle. Even if it's a cheap eBay option, just go for it because it's not a part that could fail that easily. After all, it's a very low-tech item that has very little chance of failure. So the next item that makes any DRZ really good is an FCR carburetor. If you ride the SM model or a US S model, that's something that you're really missing out on. The FCR carb makes the DRZ a completely different beast. It's worlds apart. I remember the time that I put a FCR carb on my S model, which was my first DRZ. The bike just felt so different. The throttle response was instant, the power was amazing, and the bike just felt a lot more lighter for some reason. So the main thing that I noticed was that the S model carb, or I've ridden a couple of SM models, the power curve is a very linear power curve. So you give throttle and pretty much, you get a linear progression, which is pretty expected. But when you go FCR, the moment you give throttle, it's just instant power. And no matter what speed you're at, if your gearing is just right, you will feel the power kick in even on the 5th gear. So it's definitely something worth looking into. So the next item you should be looking at getting is a long range tank. Now, the stock DRZ tank is a 10-liter tank, and on most DRZs, you're looking at a range of between 200 and 220 kilometers on that tank. So this isn't a lot, especially if you are planning to do some adventure riding or pretty much long distance riding. And you'll be lucky if you get like a full day's ride if you're doing a lot of single tracks and hard off-road tracks. And that range anxiety keeps you from enjoying the ride and living the moment. So having that big tank always helps. And if you're not doing a long ride, just fill it halfway. You don't need to always have a full tank of gas. And personally, I don't really feel that big a difference between my 17-liter tank when it's full or nearly empty. The bike just feels almost the same. So that brings me to the next point, tank selection. So the DRZ has quite a few options. You get the 14-liter Acebis, Cerbis. I actually don't know how to pronounce that name yet. Acebis, I think. That tank is a 14-liter tank, which is pretty decent and uses the original tank shrouds. Then you've got the IMS 17-liter tank. Then you've got the Safari 17-liter tank and the Safari 28-liter tank. I used the IMS 17 liter tank as well as the Safari 17 liter tank. Personally, I think they're both more or less the same. They hold fill, they look pretty decent, but I didn't notice this with my IMS tank. But my Safari tank has expanded a bit and now it actually holds about 21 liters, so that's a plus. In fact, this is something a lot of people have commented or observed about their Safari tanks. They tend to expand over time, so you always get a few extra liters. So technically I'm holding about 4 more liters than the tank is supposed to. And some people say on the larger tanks, oh, you can't get the fuel because it's sitting on the other side of the frame. But that really doesn't matter. Whenever I run out of fuel, I just tip the bike over and let the fuel flow onto the petcock side and I get my extra range. Even with the 28 liter, it's more or less the same. It just looks a bit bulkier, but essentially works the same way. So maybe some 28 liter riders can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have heard that the petcock actually sits lower than the carburetor. So this means you sometimes need to add an additional petrol pump to get that last bit of petrol out of it. I'm interested to find out more about this, so please let me know. So the next item on my list is a big one, literally a big one. So I'm talking about the big bow kit. Why would you want to have a DRZ400 when you can have a DRZ440? So now this is probably the most expensive item and something you wouldn't easily do because you don't want to take out a perfectly good piston and cylinder just to replace it with another. So when your piston and cylinder have lived through the course of its life, it's time to replace them. So when you are replacing it, you might as well go for a big bow kit. So the main benefit of using a big bow kit is that it will let you use a 15 or 16 tooth front sprocket and give you a lot more highway speed. So you won't be revving your valves off while trying to maintain 100 k's on the freeway. And all this comes with the benefit of not losing your low end torque when you're doing any off-roading. So do you really feel a difference? Absolutely you do. So this bike has a big bow kit and I definitely feel the difference because I used to ride my previous DRZ on the same roads and now I find myself cruising at 60 k's on 4th gear and not even needing to shift up to the 5th. So having this 15 tooth sprocket and being able to cruise on the 4th means I've essentially got a whole extra gear than what the typical bike comes with. This is one easy way of getting that 6th gear. So that's the list of modifications that I would recommend because I use these myself. So most of these modifications, if not all of them, are things that you could do yourself at home. All you need is a toolkit and a service manual. So why not try these things yourself? So start at the top with the free and easy ones and work yourself to the more advanced and more expensive ones. And over the years, you'll be able to tick off all these items from the list. Now there's a few other modifications that I've heard of, but I'd like to hear more from those of you who have actually tried them and if you think it really is worth going for. The first of these are hot cams. Essentially, hot cams are a pair of camshafts with more aggressive cam lobes. So from my understanding, the more aggressive cam lobes are going to keep the valves open a little bit longer so that you get more air and fuel into the chamber to get you more compression and more power. Like I said, I haven't personally used hot cams, but if you have, please let me know how they are because it's something that I am curious about and would like to try someday. The other big upgrade that I have heard of is a wide ratio gearbox. So essentially what you're going to get is a low end which is pretty much similar to what you currently get, but a high end which compensates for the lack of a 6th gear. But that means you're going to have wider gaps between individual gears. But hey, you get to enjoy low end torque as well as high end speed. So it's up to you. So I do see its appeal. So if you have ridden or have installed a wide ratio gearbox, please leave a comment and tell us what you did and what the difference feels like. So that's my list of DRZ modifications. Do you agree with it? Let me know what you think, or if you think I've missed out on something important. Or if you've designed or discovered something that can make a DRZ better, please do share it with the rest of us. Now at the beginning I mentioned that I'm going to leave out all ergonomics and rider comfort related modifications. That's because I want to do a complete video just on that topic. And the DRZ is a really popular bike. So we've got riders of different ages, different skill levels, and definitely different types of usage. So what I think might not necessarily be applicable to everyone. So it would be helpful to get feedback from everyone so that the content is valuable or useful for all the viewers. So if you've done something to your DRZ to make it more comfortable or for it to suit your body size or frame, please let me know and I'll make sure to include it in my next video. So I'm now going to wrap this video up. If you found this useful, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to On Two Wheels. And here's a little secret. if you hit the little bell icon at the bottom, you will be the first person to view my next video the moment it comes out. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.